The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sarah Mitchell limped slightly toward the mess hall. Her fellow Marines had grown accustomed to her subtle gait, though most attributed it to a training injury or perhaps just an awkward walking style. At 24, Sarah had been serving for 3 years, and, despite her exemplary record, whispers followed her wherever she went. "There goes drama queen Sarah again," muttered Corporal Jake Stevens, spooning scrambled eggs onto his tray. "Watch her limp get worse when the sergeant's around." Private First Class Maria Rodriguez elbowed him sharply. "Cut it out, Jake. You don't know what she's dealing with." "What I know is that she gets out of half the physical training because of that mysterious leg problem that comes and goes," Jake replied, his voice carrying across the mess hall. "Some of us actually work for our rank." Sarah pretended not to hear as she selected her breakfast, though her shoulders tensed slightly. She had learned to tune out the comments, the sideways glances, and the eye rolls that seemed to follow her everywhere. What they didn't understand couldn't hurt them, she told herself. What they didn't know was her business. The truth was locked away in her medical files, accessible only to a select few officers who needed to know. Sarah had lost her left leg below the knee in an IED explosion during her first deployment to Afghanistan 2 years ago. The prosthetic she wore was state-of-the-art, nearly undetectable to the casual observer, but it wasn't perfect. Some days were harder than others. Sergeant Michael Thompson observed the exchange from across the room, his weathered face showing concern. As Sarah's direct supervisor, he was one of the few people on base who knew about her prosthetic. He had fought hard to keep her in active duty, arguing that her skills as a communications specialist were too valuable to lose. Sarah had proven him right time and again, but the constant scrutiny from her peers was taking its toll. "Mitchell," Sergeant Thompson called out as Sarah finished her breakfast. "My office, 5 minutes." The mess hall fell silent for a moment. Whispered conversations resumed as Sarah nodded and cleared her tray. She could feel dozens of eyes on her back as she walked toward the exit, her slight limp more pronounced under the weight of their stares. Jake Stevens shook his head. "Probably getting another special accommodation. Must be nice to have a sergeant wrapped around your finger." "You're an idiot, Stevens," Maria said firmly. "Sarah works harder than half the Marines on this base." "Right, that's why she can't complete a full PT session without crying about her leg," Jake shot back. "Some of us signed up to serve our country, not to make excuses." In Sergeant Thompson's office, Sarah stood at attention, her spine straight despite the fatigue she felt in her residual limb. The prosthetic had been chafing all morning, but she maintained her composure. "At ease, Mitchell," Thompson said, gesturing to a chair. "How are you holding up?" "Fine, sir," Sarah replied automatically, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Thompson studied her for a moment. "The comments are getting worse, aren't they?" Sarah hesitated. She had always been taught to handle her own problems, to show strength even when she felt weak. "I can manage, sir. The mission comes first." "The mission includes taking care of our people," Thompson said firmly. "You've been through more than most of these Marines will ever face, and you're still here, still serving. That takes courage they can't even comprehend." "They think I'm faking it," Sarah said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "They think I'm using some made-up injury to get special treatment." Thompson's jaw tightened. He had seen the aftermath of Sarah's injury, had visited her during the long months of rehabilitation. He knew the pain she endured daily, both physical and emotional. The fact that she had returned to active duty at all was remarkable. "You don't owe them an explanation," he said. "But I'm worried about the impact this is having on unit cohesion and your well-being." Sarah straightened. "I won't let them push me out, sir. I earned my place here." "I know you did," Thompson replied. "But sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones we fight overseas." Later that afternoon, during combat training exercises, Sarah struggled more than usual. The prosthetic was definitely not sitting right, and each step sent sharp pains through her residual limb. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, determined not to give her critics any ammunition. "Move it, Mitchell," shouted Gunnery Sergeant Davis. "You're holding up the entire squad." Sarah increased her pace, ignoring the burning sensation in her leg. Behind her, she could hear Jake Stevens making comments to the other Marines. $10, says she'll be in the medical bay before the exercise is over. Jake whispered loudly enough for Sarah to hear. You're on, replied another voice, though I give her credit for trying. The course included a series of obstacles designed to simulate battlefield conditions. Sarah navigated the rope climb and low crawl section successfully, but when they reached the wall climb, her prosthetic failed to provide the grip she needed. She slipped and fell, landing hard on her back. The watching Marines erupted in a mixture of concern and whispered commentary. Some rushed to help, while others exchanged knowing looks and money from their impromptu bet. I'm fine, Sarah insisted, waving off assistance as she got to her feet. But the fall had shifted her prosthetic and now was nearly unbearable to walk on. Medical Bay, Mitchell, Gunnery Sergeant Davis ordered. That's not a request. As Sarah limped away from the training area, she heard Jake Stevens loud and clear, called it. Same old song and dance. How does someone with a bad leg even make it through basic training? The medical bay was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Jennifer Wong had been treating Sarah's various minor injuries for months, always professional, but never asking too many questions. What happened out there? Wong asked as Sarah sat on the examination table. Just a fall during training, Sarah replied. Nothing major. Wong began her examination, checking for obvious injuries. When she reached Sarah's left leg, her hands paused. Even through the uniform pants, she could tell something wasn't quite right. Sarah, Wong said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Sarah's heart rate increased. What do you mean? Is there something about your leg that I should know about? Something that might not be in your medical file here on base? The moment stretched between them. Sarah had managed to keep her secret for so long, but the constant pain and the weight of her fellow Marines' suspicions were becoming unbearable. I can't, Sarah whispered. You don't understand what it would mean. Wong sat down across from her. Try me. Whatever it is, I've probably seen worse. And if you're in pain, I need to help you. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of months of secrecy and judgment pressing down on her. They already think I'm faking it. If they knew the truth. The truth about what, Sarah? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah looked at the corpsman's kind face, seeing genuine concern rather than suspicion for the first time in months. Promise me, Sarah said finally, that whatever I tell you stays between us until I decide otherwise. Wong nodded solemnly. Patient confidentiality. You have my word. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. The reason my leg hurts, the reason I can't always complete the physical training the way they want me to, it's not because I'm weak or faking it. She paused, gathering courage she didn't know she still possessed. I lost my leg in Afghanistan 2 years ago, below the knee. What they see, what they think is my real leg giving me trouble. It's a prosthetic. Wong's eyes widened, but she remained professionally composed. May I examine it properly? Sarah nodded, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to be vulnerable with another person. As Wong carefully examined the prosthetic and the skin around Sarah's residual limb, she saw the chafing, the pressure sores, and the signs of someone who had been pushing through significant discomfort for far too long. How long have you been dealing with this fit issue? Wong asked. A few weeks, Sarah admitted. Maybe longer. I kept thinking it would adjust. And you've been completing training exercises like this. Sarah looked away. I didn't have a choice. They already think I'm making excuses. If I went to medical every time something hurt. Wong shook her head in amazement. Sarah, what you've been doing, the level of pain you've been tolerating, most people wouldn't last a day. Most people don't have to, Sarah replied bitterly. Most people don't have to prove they belong every single day. Wong began treating the pressure sores with gentle efficiency. Why haven't you told them? Your fellow Marines, I mean, they're your team. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it, because they've already decided I'm weak. They've already decided I don't deserve to be here. If they knew I was disabled. You're not disabled, Wong said firmly. You're a Marine who happens to use a prosthetic. There's a difference. Tell that to Stevens and the others. They think I'm getting special treatment because I can't always keep up. Imagine what they'd say if they knew the truth. Wong finished her treatment and sat back. Or imagine what they'd say if they knew you've been outperforming them while dealing with equipment failure and chronic pain. The comment caught Sarah off guard. She had never thought of it that way before. Your prosthetic needs adjustment, Wong continued, and you need to see a prosthetist as soon as possible. This level of tissue damage isn't sustainable. I can't, Sarah said immediately. If I go off base for medical appointments, if I miss more training, then they'll have to deal with it, Wong said firmly. Because the alternative is infection, worse tissue damage, and potentially losing your ability to use a prosthetic at all. The weight of the situation settled over Sarah. She had been so focused on proving she belonged that she had risked her long-term health and mobility. What do I tell Sergeant Thompson? She asked. You tell him the truth, Wong replied. Or you let me tell him. But this can't continue. As Sarah left the medical bay that evening, her leg properly treated and temporarily more comfortable, she felt both relief and terror. The secret she had guarded so carefully was no longer hers alone. Tomorrow, decisions would have to be made that could change everything. Walking across the base in the fading daylight, she passed groups of Marines heading to evening chow or recreational activities. Some nodded respectfully, others whispered among themselves. But for the first time in months, Sarah held her head high. She thought about Corpsman Wong's words. Maybe she wasn't disabled. Maybe she was just a Marine who happened to use different equipment. Maybe the real measure of strength wasn't in hiding her challenges, but in how she faced them. The next morning would bring new questions, difficult conversations, and uncertain outcomes. But tonight, for the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Sarah Mitchell felt like she might not be fighting this battle alone. The following morning arrived with an unusual tension that seemed to permeate the entire base. Sarah had barely slept, her mind racing with scenarios about how her revelation to Corpsman Wong might change everything. She dressed carefully, ensuring her prosthetic was positioned as comfortably as possible, knowing that today would likely test her limits in ways she hadn't anticipated. Sergeant Thompson was waiting for her outside the barracks, his expression unreadable. Mitchell, we need to talk. My office now. As they walked across the compound, Sarah noticed other Marines watching them with more interest than usual. Word traveled fast on a military base, even when that word was just speculation and rumors. Wong briefed me this morning, Thompson said once they were behind closed doors. She told me about your prosthetic, about the condition it's in, and about how long you've been suffering in silence. Sarah stood at attention, unsure whether she was about to be commended or discharged. Yes, sir. At ease, Thompson said, then waited until she relaxed her stance. First question, why didn't you trust me with this information months ago? The question hit harder than Sarah had expected. Sir, I was afraid of being seen as a liability. Second question, do you think so little of me that you believed I would let politics override good judgment? Sarah's throat tightened. No, sir. That's not. I was protecting myself, sir. I've seen what happens to Marines who are perceived as damaged goods. Thompson nodded slowly. I understand that fear, Mitchell. I've seen good soldiers pushed out because of injuries, and I've seen others fight to stay in when they should have been medically retired. But what you've been doing goes beyond either of those situations. He opened a file on his desk, revealing Sarah's complete medical record from her deployment and recovery. According to these reports, you shouldn't even be in active duty. The recommended course was medical retirement with full disability benefits. I fought that recommendation, sir, Sarah said firmly. I proved I could still perform my duties. You did more than that, Thompson replied. Your performance ratings have been consistently above average, even while dealing with equipment issues that would sideline most people. But what concerns me is the cost you've been paying personally. Thompson stood and moved to look out his window at the training grounds where Marines were already beginning their morning exercises. Wong showed me photos of your leg, Mitchell. The tissue damage, the pressure sores. You've been operating in constant pain for weeks. Sarah remained silent, knowing there was nothing she could say to minimize the situation. Here's what's going to happen, Thompson continued. You're going off base today to see a prosthetist. Wong has already made the appointment. You'll get your equipment properly fitted, and you'll take whatever time you need to heal properly. Sir, I can't afford to miss more training. The others already think. Thompson turned back to face her. The others think what they think because they don't have all the information. That's about to change. Sarah's heart rate spiked. Sir, I'm calling a unit meeting this afternoon. You're going to tell your fellow Marines exactly what you've been dealing with and why you've been dealing with it alone. I can't do that, sir, Sarah said immediately. It would destroy any credibility I have left. Mitchell, right now you have Marines betting on when you'll break down during training exercises. They think you're weak, unreliable, and getting special treatment you don't deserve. Is that the credibility you're worried about protecting? The words stung because they were true. Sarah had been so focused on hiding her prosthetic that she had allowed her fellow Marines to create their own narrative about her limitations. What if they see me differently afterward? She asked quietly. What if they treat me like I'm made of glass? Then we deal with that problem when it happens, Thompson said. But right now, we have a different problem. We have a Marine who's been suffering alone, and a unit that's losing cohesion because of misunderstandings and assumptions. 3 hours later, Sarah sat in a prosthetist's office 30 minutes from a base, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than she had since her initial injury. Dr. Jennifer Martinez had been working with amputee veterans for over a decade, and her expertise was immediately apparent. How long have you been dealing with this poor fit? Dr. Martinez asked as she examined Sarah's residual limb and the prosthetic socket. A few weeks, maybe a month, Sarah replied, then corrected herself. Actually, probably longer. I've been trying to push through it. Dr. Martinez shook her head. This socket hasn't been properly fitted for your current anatomy in months. Your residual limb has changed shape, which is completely normal, but the socket hasn't been adjusted to accommodate those changes. As Dr. Martinez worked to create a new socket impression, she asked questions that forced Sarah to confront how long she had been neglecting her own care. When was your last prosthetic maintenance appointment? About 6 months ago, Sarah admitted. And you've been on active duty this entire time? Yes, ma'am. Dr. Martinez paused in her work. What you've been doing is remarkable, but it's also unsustainable. Military training is demanding enough without fighting against improperly fitted equipment. I didn't want anyone to know, Sarah said. I thought if I could just push through it, prove that I could handle anything. You'd prove what? That you're tougher than physics and human anatomy. Dr. Martinez's tone was kind but firm. Honey, using a prosthetic isn't a sign of weakness. It's a tool, like any other piece of equipment. But, like any tool, it needs maintenance and proper fitting to function correctly. As Dr. Martinez created the new socket, she shared stories of other veterans she had worked with, including active duty personnel who had successfully continued their military careers with prosthetics. The key, she explained, is transparency and proper support. The Marines who do well are the ones who educate their units about their equipment and needs, not the ones who try to hide their circumstances. What if they don't understand? Sarah asked. Then you make them understand. You're not asking for pity or special treatment. You're asking for the same consideration any Marine would get if they needed equipment adjustments or maintenance. The new socket fit dramatically better, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah could walk without significant pain. The difference was so pronounced that she almost cried with relief. This is how it should feel, Dr. Martinez said. Pain should never be your normal. When you're back on base, I want you to schedule regular maintenance appointments. Every 3 months, minimum. Returning to base that afternoon, Sarah felt physically better, but emotionally terrified. The unit meeting was scheduled for 1,600 hours, and she had no idea how to explain 2 years of secrecy to Marines who had already formed strong opinions about her character and capabilities. Sergeant Thompson was waiting when she arrived. How did the appointment go? Much better, sir. The fit is significantly improved. Good. Are you ready for this afternoon? Sarah took a deep breath. As ready as I can be, sir. The meeting was held in the main briefing room, with Sarah's entire unit in attendance. As she looked out at the faces of her fellow Marines, she saw skepticism, curiosity, and, in some cases, barely concealed hostility. Jake Stevens sat in the front row, his arms crossed, and his expression clearly communicating that he expected more excuses and special pleading. Maria Rodriguez offered an encouraging nod from across the room. Sergeant Thompson called the meeting to order. The purpose of this briefing is to address ongoing unit cohesion issues and to provide information that will help us function more effectively as a team. Mitchell, you have the floor. Sarah stood, her new prosthetic feeling stable beneath her for the first time in months. She had rehearsed various versions of this speech during the drive back from her appointment, but now that the moment had arrived, she decided to abandon prepared remarks in favor of simple truth. 2 years ago, during my deployment to Afghanistan, my convoy hit an ID. She began. I lost my left leg below the knee in that explosion. The room went completely silent. Even Jake Stevens' expression changed from skepticism to shock. What you've been seeing, what you've been interpreting as me being weak or unreliable, is actually me dealing with prosthetic equipment issues. The leg you think has been giving me problems isn't actually my leg at all. She paused, letting the information sink in before continuing. I've been hiding this from you because I was afraid of being seen as damaged goods. I was afraid you'd treat me differently, or that you'd question my ability to do my job effectively. Private Williams, who had been one of the most vocal critics of Sarah's supposed weakness, raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, are you saying you've been completing all our training exercises with a prosthetic leg? That's exactly what I'm saying, Sarah replied. Including the exercises where you've seen me struggle or fail. Including the days when I've had to go to medical for treatment. The room erupted in whispered conversations as the implications of her revelation began to register. These Marines had seen Sarah complete obstacle courses, forced marches, and combat simulations that challenged even the most physically capable soldiers. Corporal Jackson, who had been relatively neutral in the ongoing speculation about Sarah's abilities, spoke up. Why didn't you tell us? We could have helped. Help how? Sarah asked. What would you have done differently if you'd known? The question hung in the air, forcing everyone in the room to confront their own assumptions and reactions. Jake Stevens, who had been silent since Sarah's initial revelation, finally spoke. I owe you an apology. We all do. I've been running my mouth about you for months, making bets about when you'd break down, talking about special treatment. He trailed off, clearly struggling with the realization of how wrong he had been. You didn't know, Sarah said simply. You were working with incomplete information. But I should have given you the benefit of the doubt, Jake insisted. You're a Marine. You earned the right to be here, and I should have respected that. Maria Rodriguez stood up. What do we do now? How can we support you better going forward? Sarah looked at Sergeant Thompson, who nodded encouragingly. Honestly, treat me like any other Marine. I don't want pity or special consideration. I just want the same understanding you'd give to anyone dealing with equipment issues. What does that mean practically? Asked Private Chun. Sarah considered the question carefully. It means understanding that some days my prosthetic might not be functioning optimally, just like some days your boots might be giving you blisters or your pack straps might be poorly adjusted. It means not assuming that equipment issues are character flaws. Gunnery Sergeant Davis, who had been observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. Mitchell, in light of this information, I need to ask, have you been completing training exercises while experiencing pain or equipment malfunctions? Yes, sir, Sarah answered honestly. And you didn't report these issues because I was afraid of being seen as unreliable, sir. Davis nodded thoughtfully. In the future, equipment issues are to be reported immediately. That's not a request for special treatment. That's basic military protocol. We don't send Marines into the field with malfunctioning equipment, regardless of what that equipment might be. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Sarah answering questions about her prosthetic, her capabilities, and her needs. By the end, the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. As the Marines filed out, many stopped to speak with Sarah individually. Some offered apologies for their previous comments, others asked technical questions about her prosthetic, and a few shared their own stories of hidden struggles and challenges. Jake Stevens was among the last to leave. "Mitchell," he said, approaching her hesitantly, "I want you to know that what you've been doing, completing training with equipment problems, dealing with pain, and still outperforming half the unit, that's not weakness. That's the opposite of weakness." "I was just doing my job," Sarah replied. "No," Jake said firmly. "You were doing your job under conditions that would have broken most people. There's a difference." As the briefing room emptied, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she had been carrying. The secret that had defined her military experience for 2 years was finally out, and the sky hadn't fallen. Sergeant Thompson approached as she gathered her materials. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," Sarah admitted, "but also relieved. I didn't realize how exhausting it was to hide this every day." "The hardest part is over," Thompson said. "Now comes the work of rebuilding trust and establishing new normal operating procedures." "Do you think they'll really treat me the same?" Sarah asked. Thompson smiled. "I think they'll treat you better than the same. They'll treat you like a Marine who's earned their respect the hard way." That evening, as Sarah sat in her quarters reflecting on the day's events, she realized that her fear of being seen as different had already been realized. The difference was that now, instead of being seen as weak and unreliable, she was being seen as strong and resilient. The next phase of her military career was beginning, built on a foundation of honesty rather than secrecy. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah Mitchell felt like she could be herself completely while still being the Marine she had always strived to be. The weeks following Sarah's revelation brought unexpected changes to the dynamics within her unit. Rather than the pity or different treatment she had feared, her fellow Marines began approaching her with a newfound respect that sometimes made her uncomfortable in its intensity. Jake Stevens had become one of her most vocal supporters, going so far as to challenge anyone who made comments about accommodations or special treatment. During a particularly difficult training exercise involving a 15-mile forced march with full gear, he positioned himself near Sarah without making it obvious, ready to assist if her prosthetic gave her trouble. "You don't have to babysit me," Sarah told him during a brief rest stop, noting how he kept glancing at her leg. "I'm not babysitting," Jake replied, adjusting his own pack. "I'm being a better teammate than I was before." There's a difference. The comment reflected a broader shift in how the unit operated. Marines who had previously grumbled about Sarah's medical visits now asked genuine questions about her equipment maintenance needs. When she needed to adjust her prosthetic during training, they treated it the same way they would treat someone adjusting a poorly fitted boot or loosening a tight strap. But the adjustment period wasn't without its challenges. Some Marines overcorrected, offering help Sarah didn't need or treating her as if she were fragile. During weapons training, Private Williams insisted on carrying her rifle case, despite her protest that she was perfectly capable of managing her own equipment. "Williams," Sarah said firmly after the third, unsolicited offer of assistance in one day, "I appreciate the thought, but I need you to treat me like any other Marine. That means letting me carry my own gear unless I specifically ask for help." The young Marine looked confused. "But don't you need what I need," Sarah interrupted, "is for you to trust that I'll speak up if I require assistance. Otherwise, you're solving problems that don't exist." Sergeant Thompson had warned her this might happen. The pendulum swing from skepticism to overprotectiveness was common when units learned about hidden challenges their members had been facing. "Give them time," he had advised. "They're processing guilt about their previous assumptions, and they want to make up for it. Eventually, they'll find the right balance." The real test came 3 weeks after her disclosure, when the unit was assigned to a joint training exercise with another company. The visiting Marines had no knowledge of Sarah's circumstances, and she found herself back in familiar territory, having to prove herself to skeptical peers who noticed her subtle limp and occasional adjustments. Captain Reynolds, the visiting officer, made his assessment clear during the initial briefing. I hope all personnel assigned to this exercise are physically capable of meeting the demands we'll be placing on them, he said, his gaze lingering meaningfully on Sarah. Sarah's unit bristled at the implied criticism. Jake Stevens started to respond, but Sarah caught his eye and shook her head slightly. This was her fight. Sir, Sarah said respectfully, all assigned personnel have been cleared for full duty and are prepared to meet any challenge you present. The exercise was designed to simulate urban warfare conditions, with teams moving through a mock city environment, clearing buildings, and responding to various threat scenarios. It was physically demanding and required split-second decision-making under stress. Sarah's team was assigned to clear a 3-story building while under simulated enemy fire. The scenario required rapid movement upstairs, through narrow corridors, and around obstacles designed to challenge even the most agile Marines. As they approached the building, Sarah could feel the visiting Marines watching her, waiting to see if the woman with the obvious gait issue would slow down their exercise. She could also feel her own unit watching, ready to defend her if anyone made inappropriate comments. "Mitchell, take point on the second-floor sweep," Sergeant Thompson ordered, assigning her one of the most demanding roles in the operation. Sarah nodded and moved into position. When the exercise began, she attacked the building with a controlled aggression that surprised everyone except her own unit. Her prosthetic, now properly fitted and maintained, responded predictably to her movements. She cleared her assigned rooms with efficiency and precision, communicating clearly with her team and adapting smoothly to the changing tactical situation. During one particularly complex room clearing sequence, Sarah had to navigate around a series of low obstacles while maintaining weapon-ready position. Her prosthetic caught slightly on one barrier, but she adjusted immediately and continued the exercise without missing a beat. Captain Reynolds, observing from monitoring position, made notes on his tablet. "Who is that Marine?" he asked one of his subordinates. "Mitchell, sir. The one you were concerned about earlier." Reynolds watched as Sarah coordinated with her team to secure the building's upper level, her movements confident and professional despite the obvious challenges of operating with a prosthetic limb. When the exercise concluded, the after-action review revealed that Sarah's team had completed their objectives faster and with fewer tactical errors than any other squad in the exercise. "Outstanding performance," Captain Reynolds announced to the assembled Marines, particularly from the Marine who took point on Building 2. That was textbook urban warfare execution. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. "I owe you an apology, Marine. I made assumptions based on incomplete observations, and I was wrong." Sarah maintained her professional composure. "No apology necessary, sir. You were working with the information you had." "No," Reynolds insisted. "I was working with prejudices I shouldn't have had. There's a difference." After the visiting unit departed, Sarah's own Marines gathered around her with expressions of pride and satisfaction. "Did you see their faces?" Maria Rodriguez laughed. They couldn't believe what they were witnessing. "That's because they've never seen a real Marine in action," Jake Stevens added, then caught himself. "I mean, I know what you mean," Sarah said, smiling. "And thank you." That evening, Sergeant Thompson called Sarah to his office for a private debrief. "How did that feel?" he asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "Different from before. When I was hiding my prosthetic, I felt like I was constantly trying to prove I belonged here. Today, I felt like I was just doing my job." "That's exactly the difference I was hoping you'd feel," Thompson said. "When you're not spending energy hiding who you are, you can focus entirely on being excellent at what you do." The visiting Marine's reaction was interesting, Sarah observed. They went from skepticism to amazement pretty quickly. "That's the power of letting your performance speak for itself," Thompson replied. "When people see what you're actually capable of, their preconceptions become irrelevant." Over the following days, word of Sarah's performance during the joint exercise spread throughout the base. Marines from other units began approaching her with questions about prosthetics, about overcoming challenges, and about maintaining peak performance despite physical obstacles. Sarah found herself in an unexpected role as an informal mentor and resource person. Young Marines dealing with injuries, older veterans considering medical retirement, and even officers seeking to better understand the capabilities of personnel with disabilities sought her advice. "I never expected this," Sarah confided to Maria Rodriguez during a quiet moment in the mess hall. "I thought revealing my prosthetic would make me different in a bad way. Instead, it's made me different in a way that seems to help people." "Maybe that's because you've been through something most of us can't imagine," Maria replied. "You've faced a life-changing injury, adapted to new limitations, and not only returned to service, but excelled at it. That's inspiring." "It doesn't feel inspiring from the inside," Sarah admitted. "Most days, it just feels like doing what needs to be done." "That's what makes it inspiring," Maria said. "You don't see yourself as a hero. You see yourself as a Marine doing her job." The conversation was interrupted by Private Chun, who approached their table hesitantly. "Excuse me, Mitchell," he said. "I was wondering if I could ask you something." "Of course," Sarah replied. "My brother lost his arm in a car accident 6 months ago," Chun explained. "He's been talking about giving up on his plans to enlist. I was wondering if you might be willing to talk to him sometime. Maybe help him understand that it doesn't have to end his dreams." Sarah was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of the request. 6 months ago, she had been hiding her own prosthetic out of shame and fear. Now, someone was asking her to help another person embrace the possibility of military service despite a disability. "I'd be happy to talk with him," she said finally. "But, Chin, make sure he understands that my experience is just one story. Everyone's situation is different." "I understand," Chun said gratefully. "But hearing from someone who's actually done it, who's actually made it work, that could mean everything to him." As Chun walked away, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her perspective had shifted. The secret she had guarded so carefully, the vulnerability she had been desperate to hide, had somehow become a source of strength, not just for herself, but for others facing similar challenges. "You realize what's happening, don't you?" Maria asked, observing Sarah's thoughtful expression. "What do you mean?" "You're becoming the person you needed when you were struggling alone," Maria explained. "You're becoming the proof that it's possible to succeed." That night, Sarah called her parents for the first time in months. She had been avoiding contact with family, afraid they would hear something in her voice that would reveal how much she had been struggling. "Sarah," her mother's voice came through clear and warm. "We've been so worried. You haven't called in ages." "I know, Mom. I'm sorry. Things have been complicated here." "Complicated how? Are you okay?" Sarah took a breath and made a decision that would have been impossible just weeks earlier. "I'm okay now," she said, "but I need to tell you about some things I've been dealing with. About my leg, about the Marines, about everything I've been hiding from you." For the next hour, Sarah told her parents the truth about her prosthetic, her struggles with unit acceptance, and her recent decision to stop hiding her circumstances. She explained the pain she had been enduring, the fear she had been carrying, and the unexpected support she had discovered. "Oh, honey," her mother said when Sarah finished. "I wish you had told us sooner. We could have helped somehow." "Ow," Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "We could have reminded you that you're stronger than you think," her father interjected. "We could have told you that anyone who can't see your worth doesn't deserve to serve alongside you." I needed to figure that out for myself, Sarah realized. I needed to prove it to myself before I could believe it from anyone else. "And now you have," her mother said proudly. "You've not only proven it to yourself, but you've become an example for others." As Sarah ended the call, she felt a completeness she hadn't experienced since before her injury. The various parts of her life, her military service, her family relationships, her personal challenges, and her professional goals were finally aligned rather than in conflict. The next morning brought news that would test this newfound integration in ways Sarah couldn't have anticipated. Sergeant Thompson called her to his office with an expression that mixed excitement with concern. "Mitchell, I've received an interesting communication from Division," he said, holding an official-looking document. "They're requesting volunteers for a new program designed to integrate amputee veterans into specialized military roles." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of program, sir?" "It's a pilot initiative Thompson explained. They want to demonstrate that properly supported military personnel with prosthetics can not only continue their current roles, but can potentially take on expanded responsibilities. They're looking for exemplary Marines to serve as test cases. Test cases for what? Thompson smiled. Leadership positions, advanced training opportunities, assignments that would challenge the military's traditional understanding of what's possible for personnel with disabilities. Sarah stared at the document, recognizing both the opportunity and the enormous responsibility it represented. They specifically requested you, Thompson continued. Apparently, word of your performance during the joint exercise reached some very senior people. What would it involve? That's the part that might concern you, Thompson admitted. It would involve a significant amount of visibility. Media interviews, speaking engagements, serving as a public face for the program. You'd essentially be stepping forward as a representative for all military personnel with disabilities. Sarah felt the familiar surge of anxiety that came with the prospect of being different, of standing out, of being defined by her prosthetic rather than her abilities. I need to think about it, she said. Of course, Thompson replied. But, Sarah, consider this. 6 months ago, you were hiding your prosthetic because you were afraid of being seen as different. Now, you have the opportunity to show the entire military community what different can accomplish. That afternoon, Sarah found herself walking the perimeter of the base, her properly fitted prosthetic making the journey comfortable for the first time in months. She thought about the scared, secretive Marine she had been just weeks earlier and about the confident, open person she was becoming. The program Thompson had described would require her to step even further outside her comfort zone, to embrace not just her own circumstances, but to become an advocate for others facing similar challenges. As she completed her circuit and headed back toward the barracks, Sarah realized that the choice before her wasn't really about whether to hide or reveal her prosthetic anymore. That decision had already been made. The choice now was about whether to use her experience to help others find their own path forward, or to remain content with simply having found her own. By the time she reached her quarters, Sarah Mitchell knew what her answer would be. 3 months later, Sarah Mitchell stood before a gathering of military personnel, veterans, and civilians at the Pentagon, wearing her dress blues and speaking into a microphone about experiences she had once been desperate to hide. The hardest battles I've fought as a Marine weren't against enemy combatants, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. They were against my own fear of being seen as different, as broken, as less than the Marine I had always believed myself to be. The audience listened intently as Sarah described her journey from hiding her prosthetic to embracing her role as an advocate for military personnel with disabilities. The program she had joined, officially called the Adaptive Service Excellence Initiative, had exceeded everyone's expectations in its first quarter. In the months since accepting the position, Sarah had worked with dozens of military personnel dealing with various physical challenges. She had helped develop new protocols for integrating adaptive equipment into standard training procedures, consulted on base accessibility improvements, and, most importantly, served as living proof that physical adaptation and military excellence were not mutually exclusive concepts. The question I'm asked most frequently, Sarah continued, is how other service members reacted when they learned about my prosthetic. People expect stories of discrimination, of being pushed out, of having to fight for basic respect. She paused, scanning the faces in the audience, many of which belonged to current and former military personnel dealing with their own challenges. The truth is more complex than that, she said. Yes, there were Marines who questioned my abilities before they knew the full story. Yes, there were assumptions and misunderstandings that created unnecessary friction. But when I finally chose transparency over secrecy, when I trusted my fellow Marines with the truth about my circumstances, they responded with the honor and integrity I should have expected from them all along. In the front row, Sarah spotted several familiar faces. Jake Stevens had taken leave to attend her presentation, along with Maria Rodriguez and even Sergeant Thompson, who had been promoted to gunnery sergeant since Sarah's transfer to the special program. The real barrier wasn't my prosthetic, Sarah explained. It was my own belief that I needed to hide it. By trying to protect myself from judgment, I created the very situation I was trying to avoid. I appeared unreliable because I couldn't explain my limitations. I seemed to be receiving special treatment because I couldn't discuss my actual needs. After her formal presentation, Sarah participated in a panel discussion with other veterans who had successfully continued their military careers despite various disabilities. The conversation was candid and practical, covering everything from equipment maintenance to psychological adjustment to career advancement strategies. Captain Lisa Martinez, who had lost her right arm in Syria and continued serving as an intelligence officer, addressed a question about leadership challenges. The hardest part isn't proving you can do the job, she explained. It's convincing others that they can trust you with responsibility for their safety and success. When you're different in an obvious way, people worry that different means unreliable. How do you overcome that perception? Asked an audience member who identified himself as a recently injured soldier considering medical retirement. Sarah leaned forward to answer. You don't overcome it by hiding or by trying to blend in. You overcome it by being undeniably excellent at what you do and by being completely honest about both your capabilities and your limitations. She thought about the joint training exercise that had marked a turning point in her own journey. People respect competence and honesty. What they don't respect is mystery and inconsistency. When you try to hide your challenges, you create both. After the panel ended, Sarah was approached by dozens of attendees seeking advice, sharing their own stories, or simply expressing gratitude for her willingness to speak publicly about her experiences. A young Marine approached hesitantly, favoring his left leg in a way that Sarah recognized immediately. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Private Rodriguez. I lost my foot in a training accident 8 months ago. I'm supposed to be medically retired, but I've been fighting it." Sarah studied his face, seeing her own past fears reflected in his expression. "What are you fighting for, specifically?" she asked. "I want to stay in. I want to deploy with my unit. But everyone keeps telling me it's impossible, that I should take the retirement and be grateful. What do you think?" Sarah asked. The question seemed to surprise him. "Mom, what do you think about your capabilities? Not what others think, not what the medical board thinks, not what your family thinks. What do you honestly assess your potential to be?" Rodriguez considered carefully. "I think I can do the job. I think I can do it as well as I did before. Maybe better because I understand things now that I didn't understand before." "Then fight for it," Sarah said simply. "But fight smart. Don't fight against the system. Work within it. Don't fight alone. Build allies. And, most importantly, don't fight by hiding who you are. Fight by proving what you can accomplish." "How do I start?" Sarah pulled out a business card and wrote a phone number on the back. "Call this number tomorrow. Ask for Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. She runs the program I'm part of. Tell her I sent you, and tell her you want to explore your options." As Rodriguez walked away, with renewed purpose in his step, Sarah felt the same satisfaction she experienced every time she was able to help another service member navigate challenges similar to her own. "That never gets old, does it?" a familiar voice said behind her. Sarah turned to find Jake Stevens, looking sharp in his dress blues and wearing the chevrons of a newly promoted sergeant. "Congratulations on the promotion," Sarah said, embracing her former critic-turned-advocate. "Thanks," Jake replied. "I wanted to thank you for something else, though." "What's that?" "For teaching me that strength comes in forms I never understood before. You change how I think about what it means to be a Marine, about what it means to overcome obstacles." Jake paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've been working with wounded warriors at the local VA hospital in my spare time, teaching them that their military careers don't have to end just because they've been injured. I tell them about you, about what you've accomplished. I hope you tell them about their own potential, not just my story," Sarah said. "I do," Jake assured her. "But your story gives them hope that their potential can become reality." Later that evening, Sarah sat in her hotel room, reviewing the feedback forms from her presentation and preparing for the next day's meetings with Pentagon officials about expanding the Adaptive Service Excellence Initiative. The program had grown beyond anyone's initial projections. What had started as a small pilot involving a handful of volunteers had attracted attention from the highest levels of military leadership. Sarah's role had evolved from test case to program coordinator to national spokesperson. Her phone rang, displaying her parents' number. "How did it go today?" her mother asked immediately. "Really well," Sarah replied. The audience was engaged, the questions were thoughtful, and I think we made some real connections. "We saw the news coverage," her father added. They interviewed some of the people who attended. Everyone seemed impressed. Sarah smiled. Her parents had become her biggest supporters once she had allowed them to understand what she was facing. Their pride in her accomplishments was evident every time they spoke. "There's something I need to tell you both," Sarah said. "What's that, honey?" "I've been offered a permanent assignment to the Pentagon. They want me to head up the expansion of the Adaptive Service Program nationally." The line was quiet for a moment. "That's wonderful, Sarah," her mother said finally. "But how do you feel about it?" It was a question Sarah had been asking herself for weeks. The position would mean leaving active field service for a desk job, trading the camaraderie of a unit for the politics of high-level administration. "Honestly, I'm torn," Sarah admitted. "Part of me loves being a regular Marine, just doing my job alongside my unit. But another part of me sees the opportunity to help hundreds of Marines who are facing the same challenges I faced." "What does your heart tell you?" her father asked. Sarah looked out her hotel window at the lights of Washington, D.C., thinking about all the conversations she had had that day with service members seeking guidance and hope. "My heart tells me that sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones you fight for yourself," she said. "They're the ones you fight for people who are still figuring out how to fight for themselves." 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in Sergeant Thompson's office for what would likely be their final meeting as part of the same unit. "I have mixed feelings about this transfer," Thompson admitted. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished and excited about the impact you'll have in your new role. But I'm going to miss having you as part of my team." "You'll always be part of my team, sir," Sarah replied. "You were the first person to see past my disability to my potential. That made all the difference." Thompson smiled. "You made the difference, Mitchell. I just provided the opportunity." As Sarah packed her belongings that final week, Marines from throughout the base stopped by to wish her well, to share their own stories of overcoming challenges, or simply to thank her for changing their understanding of what was possible. Maria Rodriguez helped her pack her dress uniforms. "You realize you've become something of a legend around here, right?" "That wasn't the goal," Sarah said. "I know. That's what makes it meaningful. You didn't set out to be an inspiration. You just set out to be the best Marine you could be, regardless of circumstances." On her final day with the unit, Sarah participated in one last training exercise. It was a simple live-fire drill, nothing as complex as the urban warfare scenario she had mastered, but it felt symbolic nonetheless. As she moved through the course, her prosthetic functioning perfectly and her movements confident and precise, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since the day she had first hidden her disability out of fear and shame. She had learned that the qualities that made someone a good Marine, courage, integrity, adaptability, commitment to mission accomplishment, and the welfare of others, had nothing to do with the configuration of their limbs. She had discovered that strength came not from hiding weaknesses, but from acknowledging limitations while refusing to be defined by them. Most importantly, she had found that her greatest contribution to the Marine Corps wasn't in spite of her prosthetic, but because of everything her journey with it had taught her about resilience, authenticity, and the power of refusing to give up on herself or others. After the exercise, her unit gathered for an informal farewell ceremony. Jake Stevens presented her with a plaque inscribed with the words, "To a Marine who taught us that different doesn't mean less." "Different means more," Sarah corrected, reading the inscription. "Different means bringing perspectives and strengths that others might not have developed. Different means being uniquely valuable." As she prepared to leave the base the next morning, Sarah took a final walk around the grounds where she had struggled so hard to hide her true self, where she had learned to embrace her authentic identity, and where she had discovered that her greatest weakness could become her greatest source of strength. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Private Rodriguez, the young Marine she had met at the Pentagon presentation. Got accepted into the Adaptive Service Program. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Sarah smiled, knowing that her new role would bring hundreds of similar messages, each representing a life changed by the simple idea that disability and military excellence could coexist. She had started this journey as a Marine desperate to hide her prosthetic leg. She was ending it as an advocate determined to ensure that no other service member would have to choose between authenticity and acceptance, between being honest about their challenges and pursuing their dreams. The shy, secretive Marine who had once feared that revealing her prosthetic would end her career had become a confident leader whose prosthetic had actually launched a new and more meaningful chapter of service. As Sarah drove away from the base toward her new assignment and new challenges, she understood that her story was no longer about a Marine with a prosthetic leg. It was about a Marine who had learned that true strength comes not from perfection, but from the courage to be imperfect in pursuit of something greater than yourself. The silent soldier had found her voice, and she was going to use it to help others find theirs.